So, Ani Bojo, welcome to Ancestral Ascensions. Today we are talking about the First Peoples Indigenous Solidarity Day and what is happening across Turtle Island as we speak. Just a little bit of a history on for in what is being called today is National Indigenous Peoples Day, which is also being recognized as the month of June. But just a little bit of history is that back in 1945, actually, the chiefs across Turtle Island wanted to declare June 21st as Indian Day. I don't think there was much traction on that. They weren't able to do things in 1945, but it was a time when our people were beginning to use their voice and stand up. I think that after the Second World War, that's really what gave our people the bravery, I guess, to begin to use their voice. So then in 1945, that's where that was. And I think that that held true with our chiefs because actually in 1982, the National Indian Brotherhood, as it was called at that time, and it's now called the Assembly of First Nations, they declared June 21st as Aboriginal Solidarity Day. So that was in 1982. And then, of course, then we have bring it right down to 1990, the monumental vote that was done by Elijah Harper from the Manitoba legislation. He made sure that they voted down the Meech Lake Accord. And that Meech Lake Accord was about changing the Constitution of Canada and wanting the province of Quebec to have distinct society within Canada, as well as the federal government wanted to place more responsibility onto the provinces to deal with the First Nations people in each of the provinces. But that, of course, goes against that treaty relationship that we've had with the First Nations here on Turtle Island since settlers began coming here and visiting even. So that was on June 21st, 1990. So I think like for me, I was a teenager at that time, and that was a really proud day for me. And I remember we were so proud to, call June 21st Aboriginal Solidarity Day as we knew it at that time. And so that really brought together a unity amongst our people, and we felt like we could be united and stand up for who we were. And then in 1996, Governor General Romeo LeBlanc renamed it National Aboriginal Day. So taking away that solidarity piece that I think really did raise a lot of pride in our people, finally we could hold our heads up on Turtle Island and feel proud of who we were. And so that was in 1996. So we lost that momentum that Elijah Harper really did bolster with his no vote against the Meech Lake Accord. And then in 2017, they wanted to change it to Indigenous Peoples Day. So to be more politically correct, rather than saying Aboriginal, because as we know, abnormal means not normal. So Aboriginal means not original. And so they wanted to change it to Indigenous Peoples Day. And then, in 2017, that's when Justin Trudeau did make it National Indigenous Peoples Day. And then it was declared a month at that time. So that's kind of the background on Indigenous Peoples Day that we are celebrating today on June 21st, representing, a new season for our people and, the warmer weather and that type of thing. But, as I'm talking, I'm just going to write down treaty relationship because, we do have a responsibility as Canadians to know what our responsibilities are being treaty holders in this country. And today we have with us, my guest is Doran Ritchie, and I'm going to turn it over to Doran to introduce himself and where he's from and maybe a little bit of your background there, Doran.
Sure. Thank you, Trish, and thank you for having me on the podcast today. Like you said, my name is Doran Ritchie. I am a member of Saugeen First Nation, better known as the Saugeen Ojibwe Nation. That's the collective territory of Saugeen First Nation and Chippewas of Nawash Unceded First Nation and Bear Clan. And the context of conversation here is solidarity and sovereignty. And when we talk about Indigenous Peoples Day, a lot of that, my background was not known to me. And the purpose of the solstice in Indigenous Peoples Day was marked this morning with song and ceremony, something that I was not accustomed to growing up. And I say this in the importance of the discussion of sovereignty, the solstice, and Indigenous Peoples Day, because in the earth, our mother takes a one big inhale and exhale once, twice a year during the summer and the winter solstice. So the time of renewal, the time of remembering the light, and prosperity and balance that it brings, but also the tremendous weight and the growth and the potential in life that the darkness also holds. It's a symbol of both remembrance and honoring the virtues of light and darkness, which are all within and has to be integrated within our own spirit. And so that's something that has 5-10 years ago, you wouldn't have heard me talk like that. And so we talk about history, and I have my own specific history, and that has led to a tremendous career of many opportunities, experiences, learning, facing a lot of tribulation and adversity, being an Indigenous person, finding out who your identity is and dealing with the repercussions of generational curses and trauma, and then trying to identify what sovereignty is. So that's why this is an important conversation. So that's a little bit of background on me. I worked for all sorts of governments, the provincial, federal, and Indigenous governments. And the purpose of this is to share my experiences relative to sovereignty and to shed light on some of the prophecies that we've heard of over the years. So that's a little bit about on me.
Okay, miigwech. That's awesome. Yes, so and what was life like for you growing up? I guess you kind of touched about it a little bit. Um, but maybe you could shed a little bit more light on how how you were raised. You don't have to get into details, of course, but maybe just an overview and where you did hear some of these teachings or some of these prophecies when you were a small child.
I'm going to jump right into that because if I went the long route, we'd be here for hours, and
Yeah.
in fact, maybe days. So um, I started off. I was born into a loving family and a Christian family, and that came with rules, and that came with certain ways of life. And while those experiences occurred, and while I experienced them in its full capacity, um, the indoctrination, the teachings, and the lessons of our people were void of those lessons. And in fact, it was thoroughly taught that these ways were not something to follow and something that was obsolete. And during those times, as a child, not understanding a whole lot, I experienced a whole lot of now what I know as spiritual things. I experienced encounters, things in the dreams, which now I understand is a place called the dream time and being conscious in those awarenesses, if you will. And experiencing the anomaly of a Christian way and then having my own spirit suppressed by that same teaching, and I'm going to call that indoctrination because wasn't my parents' fault. It was a systematic failure over time. When they were born, there was nothing for them, and that was the fruit that was left after everything else was taken. And so that created a distinction, I will say, where my body was being told to go one way, but my spirit was also being pulled another way. As a child, I was dreaming of large eagles the size of humans talking to me in the language. Total taboo to what I was being raised in. And dreaming of bears and other things that I could only conjure up in a movie. The unbelievable, if you will. And there lied the conflict in my existence. And so my entire life, the inheritance of generational curses, trauma, everything, addictions, alcoholism, you name it. I won't get into all those right now, but the worst of the worst. And as I evolved, things happened in my family, in my community. And while I sought the truth, and they prayed for knowledge, wisdom, and understanding the entire time, it seemed as if I was going further and further into the fire. And that perhaps maybe spiritual fire of learning. And while I did everything in my life with the full belief that it was for the right cause, I had begun to discover I had no idea who I was as an individual. And see, that's what changed a lot because I was trained, you see. I was academically trained. I was professionally trained. I was, from the start, trained to do this, trained to do that. You must do this, you must do that. I did all of them. And for me, I suffered terribly for it. But I also gained a tremendous amount of experience, and in that experience birthed the question of who am I? And that question of who I am and who am I tortured my soul for 25 years because I had no idea who I was until everything that I had worked so hard for diminished right in front of me. And that's when the lessons of the Creator began. And that's when the awareness became aware of myself, or I became aware of the awareness. And then everything that had made sense previously stopped making sense. Everything began to misshape, disform, melt away. And it was torment for a long time. And the loneliness and the quietness was torment for a while until it was just silence. And then silence turned to peace. And peace turned to solitude. And then the awakening started happening. And then I began to understand who I was and why those dreams visited me and why they still haunted me to this day. You see, in my career, I'd spent my entire life one way fighting for this nation or another. And the symptoms that go along with working for that level of governance is fairly traumatic. And I will get into that at some point, but it was the path of enlightenment that I want to focus on, the path of sovereignty. Because none of this made sense to me. I was conflicted in a world that I was told to believe in, and I tried with all my heart. And it took the personal lessons and the teachings to incorporate them into my own life, the good, the bad, and the indifferent, to apply those sacred teachings, the basics of our four medicines, if you will. Learning who we are, despite being told that it's not our way, it was a difficult and trying task. Trying to become something, trying to become a Christian, trying to become a professional, trying to become what they call traditional. Every one of those groups that I personally tried to connect with, I fell flat on my face. And thinking to myself that was the way, and I found out that the inner path, that everything was quite literally within. And so that's what I wanted to focus on. That was a bit about my upbringing. I didn't know ceremony. I didn't know song. Yet my whole life I was being taught ceremony and song by listening to the resonance of the forest, listening to the flow of the animals, hearing the life force in the water and the trees. Despite all those, those closed doors, it was as if the Creator was always watching my back and saying, you don't need any of that. The ceremony is within. You are the ceremony.
Mm-hmm.
Have
So
all.
what was that catalyst? What was the catalyst that brought you to this, as you said, you felt flat on your face. So what really hit home for you to realize that your ancestors were calling you, or Creator was calling you to do or have a look at things in a different way?
I'm going to say it was the result of complete and utter cataclysmic failure on my own terms. Doing what was required of me and doing it to the point of my own demise and believing in something so blindly that I was willing to do anything to see the results, to see it through. I think both that was my propulsion to the awakening. You see, because what I was given didn't quite really add up as a child. What I was seeing didn't add up. What I was feeling didn't add up. What I was seeing in my own community didn't add up. What I served didn't add up. What it still produces is still not adding up. You see, then everything failed. And it took a complete destruction of my own ego and my own self-will, despite trying so hard. And coming to that conclusion that aloneness and loneliness is probably one of our greatest gifts if it can be held on to that long. And that's why I'm so conscious of the darkness, because in the beginning of our stories, we talk about nothing. We talk about in the beginning, there was nothing. My version of it is in the beginning, there was nothing. And then the awareness became aware of itself. And the awareness became of its own awareness. And then the dream happened. See, that awareness is darkness. And amongst all that darkness, that's where I was able to find the light within
Mm-hmm.
that everybody's trying to talk to me about.
It's really interesting. I've been actually learning a lot about the divine masculine and feminine, and and we know that Grandmother Moon, who comes out in the at night when we see her at night, and the sun, that grandfather sun that we talk about, it's that balance of the male and the female, and so when we look at that, even in terms of positive and negative polarities. Just like within a cell, there's a proton, a neutron, and an electron, that proton being the masculine and that electron being the feminine, it's all the way down, right down to our DNA. So that light and the darkness is within all of us and with that and belongs within all of the things that surround us, whether they're animate or inanimate. So it's nice that you bring that up, and it just really reminds me of those teachings that I've been learning about. They say that the first thing that came from that darkness was the sound.
That's right.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And that's the beautiful thing about it, because I think we're to simplify it, it really recognizes the interconnectedness of everything. But
Absolutely.
I laugh because that interconnectedness goes from the start to present.
Mm-hmm.
Literally was no beginning and end, and it's kind of the replication of the same thing over and over. And so that's what's profound about my own path,
Mm-hmm.
because according to the story of my life, I should be nowhere near here.
Mm-hmm.
Yet I held on to the values, the virtues of things, and I found the
Mm-hmm.
spiritual path.
Absolutely.
And that's what brings around the importance of ceremony. That's what brings upon the importance of song, to remind ourselves of why we're doing ceremony, of why we found that. I couldn't help myself, and I promise I won't get emotional, but this morning I couldn't help myself, but I couldn't even finish packing my pipe without completely just weeping. And see, to the next person, they might think I'm a crazy person for saying that, but for someone that didn't understand or had nothing to do with the pipe, to feel its life force throughout, that is the difference.
Mhm.
Because the old person did not acknowledge that.
Mhm.
The sovereign person cannot live without those things.
Mhm. So
Mm.
sovereign, that's a good segue, I think, into where we may want to take this conversation in terms of our sovereignty as nations within Canada. So a nation within a nation, and that treaty relationship, and how we all have a responsibility to know and understand that there have been treaties that have been in place long before Confederation, that were those agreements between the Crown and the First Nations people here. Um, do you want to talk a little bit about that relationship, Doran? Because as you said, you have worked in the federal and provincial levels as well as the Indigenous or First Nations level of governance. And just talk a little bit about how that relationship is going, or maybe what you see or have seen, um, and just so that people can begin to understand, what we're talking about here.
Mhm. Yes, absolutely. Um,
Mhm.
sorry, I just turned my phone off.
Mhm.
I just want to jump back for one split second and
Yeah.
remind some contextual language about prophecy. I want to talk real quickly, just acknowledging the eighth fire. And
Mhm.
it's foretelling to herald a new change and a resurgence of old wisdom, an awakening of our own collective consciousness. Is because we have fallen asleep. And there are two paths that we're going to take. The one that leads to the continual deprivation of our own world, our own culture and society, versus the new one that brings about a new path. Second to that is the other prophecy around the great tree, where the red people would be a blessing in a world that is very sick and very hostile. And I think those times are right now. And so, why treaties matter?
Yes.
Because that was the basis and the foundation. See, it was the crown from overseas that recognized our people as a nation.
Mhm.
Canada would not be able to, was not able to stand or be formed without the recognition of the sovereignty of the first people here.
Mhm.
The first question is, what are the treaties and who am I? Because those two questions answer everything contextually to where we are at today.
Mhm.
In our territory, in the Saugeen Ojibwe Nation, we have a number of treaties. 1836 being the first treaty, and subsequently following, there's a few more after that, but the one of focus right now is Treaty 72. And what's important about that treaty is not so much about what's happening right now relative to the legal process, and I know that's underway, but understanding Canada's history relative to that treaty. I have worked for 15 plus years in this line of work, and understanding the intricacies of both provincial and federal governments was a daunting task, because that sets the understanding for how they understand and apply the rule of law relative to the treaty. In that line of work, it's all academic, it's all Western, it's all legal, and it's all specific language around Western norms.
Mhm.
And while First Nations, and in the case of Saugeen Ojibwe Nation, stand by that treaty in terms of the honor, um, my experience is that it is limited in terms of our own knowledge of the robustness of the actual treaty. And what I want to focus on is not how much, what are we doing a good job at maintaining our honor, et cetera, et cetera. I think over time that will spell itself out. What I want to focus on is who signed the treaty and why does that matter? And why it matters is at the time of the treaty, you had order, you had an intact system that was operational at the time of contact. And those were led by the clans. And they had head people that represented. So I want to back up a little bit, talk about the clans again. For those people that don't understand what that word means, in plain language, that just means, I stated earlier that I'm Bear Clan. So bear are commonly found in North America and in this region. And another animal you might find is an eagle. That's also a clan. You might also find a turtle or a crane. Each of those clans were naturally home to this area. And in our stories, that is the third order of creation. And so they were here before us. And when they were here, they lived in harmony and balance. And so the fourth order creation being us, the gift to us was their lessons of balance and prosperity. And these are my own words. And over time, that was the every person bear witness to that, even Westerners. When they first came to Turtle Island, it was undoubtedly full of harvest and bounty, as we all know. That was the gift, so long as we honored that order of creation. And that clan system was ordered by one person to speak on behalf of that one clan. That's tremendous responsibility. But that also puts the onus back on the person, because it was the people that picked that person, that head person, to speak. And it didn't have to be male or female. It had to be a person. There was order. We had 4 pillars of order in our community. We had the medicines and the teachings, and we had the children and the women and the men on the outside, the elders right there helping all that stuff. And that was taught from the clans. And that's the sovereignty, the balance, the prosperity that our people were thriving in at the time of contact. And our natural desires to want. And so what did we do? Not us, but what did natural human order keep doing is we wanted to take and take and take and take. And so when we signed those treaties, we too forgot our ways. And
Well, when we look at those treaties, we already suffered many hundreds of years of the treatment that we received from those newcomers, right? Like when we look at Samuel de Champlain, who came here in 1591, or that was, the French had been here, and, many others had come prior to that. So, I heard a story about how when the newcomers did come here to Turtle Island, they called our people Indios, meaning the most beautiful people they seen. And I do believe that it was from the shining of the chakras, and that because we sat with ourselves, because we had that self-reflection, because we had that connection to the land, that you could actually see the light within us. And so it was absolutely beautiful when they came, because, with what was happening over on their side of the water, was not what was happening on our side of the water. Like you say, that conversation with the animals, that conversation with the plants, the conversation with our grandmothers and grandfathers, those rock formations, and I do believe that we had an opportunity to speak very clearly with them through that pineal gland, which is that masculine side within us, I've just been like really compiling a lot of that information. So, by the time we got to the actual annuity treaties or land use treaties, we had suffered many, many traumas by that time. And so, yeah, like to the point where we even had to have one of those treaties, that wampum of the dish with one spoon, saying that, yes, we are here, this is what we have, and we can all share from what this bounty Mother Earth, Turtle Island gives to us. So yeah,
There's
absolutely.
something, there's something of worth noting here with the talk of spirituality and the connection with animals and stuff. Over
Mhm,
time, I've caused it's these questions have caused me to look and to read the pages of time. And what I
mhm.
notice very interestingly about the pages of time is that in the European world, the onset of witchcraft in that line of belief was something that was our First Nations people were subjected to. There was no such thing as that. There was the connectedness, the interconnectedness
Right.
alone. And you still
Yes,
see that in modern day. When you start
absolutely.
practicing your knowledge, the label of that comes full force from anyone and everyone. And I want to assure you that. But also not to be afraid of that, because that is who we are. That is the essence of life. When you look at a dog, when you look at a baby animal, when you look at a human being, if you don't see the presence of the creator there, then there's something wrong. And when
Mhm,
you're using the gifts of creation to create and to help,
mhm.
that's a pretty powerful statement that sounds a lot more like healing than witchcraft to me.
Absolutely.
And that
And
is
with the
power
changes
within.
that Mother Earth is going through right now, the raising of her own consciousness, we have no choice but to begin to look at our own healing. Absolutely. Yeah.
Just starting to break the conversation of the veil, if you will.
Mhm,
Subsequent conversations like this 3, 4 years ago would have been like, well, let's go to the doctors. Let's go to see this person or that person. The conversation I've been hearing as of late is, oh, I know much medicine, important journey. Even the language and how we apply that knowledge is changing. It's a
mhm,
powerful thing because I've never heard of that before. It's exciting to see that. And
mhm.
so that's some context to sovereignty, the, the treaties and the power and the sovereignty in which that we had at the time, knowing full well those were our oppositions. To me, oh, sorry, there's just 1 second.
An announcement happening.
Yeah, that's just.
Yeah,
Sorry.
no worries.
Where
Mhm,
was I again? Just talking about leading up to, I guess, the importance of treaties and sovereignty and why this is all important. I think that's where we're at. Um,
mhm.
for me, our governance structures are not well representing the sovereignty of the treaties in which they were used to sign. We see that in our modern governance and leadership today. Um, I'm not saying I'm not discounting the hard work that has gone into the work so far, but it's exposing the effort or where we're actually concentrating our actual effort. The question that was never that never occurred to me in life was the very basic question of who are you? The first time somebody asked me that question, I'm like, well, my name is Doran Ritchie, blah blah blah. I gave
Yeah.
the speech, and it was my teacher, my late teacher, who asked me time and again, and finally the third time when he asked me, he said, "Who are you?" My answer was finally, "I don't know," and that brought on this journey of sovereignty. I know we talked about cataclysmic failure and everything like that, but where it really began to sink in is where I stopped perceiving who I was as who I was told, what I did, what I believed in, and what I thought. And most importantly, what everybody else thought of me.
Right.
That, when I wasn't able to answer that question, then I started looking within. And then those questions starting to defy every logic that I had. And it was terrifying. It was scary because it shook everything that I believed in, and it tore it right down. But yet I kept persisting because I knew what I had inside wasn't resonating, wasn't sitting with me. When I look at my people, when I look at the landscape of leadership across the board, when I look at my own community, the status quo is unacceptable. And it's not because we are still suffering, it's because of the choices that we are making to not answer the questions that I'm asking right now and talking about is who am I? I'm not going to say it made things right or wrong, but it certainly opened my eyes to this word we call in our language, Dibwewin. And the seventh grandfather of truth.
Mhm.
Truth is just truth no matter what.
Yeah.
It's how far we search into that and what we integrate it as. That's the impact. Truth is just truth by itself. It's the integration, the acceptance of who we actually are, not who we were raised to be or who we were told to be. Who we are in our spirit, who our spirit is, who the Creator made us to be. That's the thing that concerns myself and my own people right now. And to put it into plain language, the spiritual, cultural, ethical, and generational curses that plague all of our people as a means of going through that process of what I call the dark night. I don't have any of those questions anymore. I don't have any of those worries. I still fight the fight, but it was accepting who I was and understanding that my soul needed to be healed first.
Right. And
And
there are some really hard truths out there right now too, with still 1 in 3 of our children who are in the child welfare system, 1 in 3 of our people who are locked up in prisons and jails across the country. You know, these are the things that we're dealing with when we only make up 4.9% of the population. Like those kinds of numbers, 1/3 of all of these systems, Canada, we need to really have a look at these calls to action, these 94 calls to action as to what can be happening. And as far as I know, I don't think much has been worked on, and so, today with it being, June 21st and bringing this awareness to some of the plights that our people are dealing with, even through your personal journey and questioning who you are. And I think that this is a question that many of our people have had is who are we? Part of the issue is that we haven't been able to identify who we are under the Indian Act, a piece of legislation that's been imposed onto us since 1876, only 9 years after Confederation. And when we think about the contributions that our warriors have made, our people have made to even form this country that we call Canada, you know, even when we look at that Treaty 72 that you were talking about in 1854, all of our men went to war in 1812. It was 10,000 of our Anishinaabe men that went to fight, and there was only 1,600 British soldiers to fight that war at that time. Like those numbers are absolutely astronomical. From what I understand, Chief Joseph Brant had 5,000 warriors to go down in the Niagara region, and Chief Deseranto had 2,000 over on his side. So you look at almost 20,000 First Nations warriors that stood up for who we are, for our land and for our culture, but also under that relationship of the crown based on that 1763 Royal Proclamation that is actually still a living document today.
mhm.
So yes, absolutely. We need to have a look at this. And so yes, we celebrate and we recognize our First Nations people. I remember being in college and learning that by the year 2020, there was supposed to be no more First Nations people left here in Canada. Yeah, I think that's what they were hoping for. I hate to say it that way. But no more of our people, no more, responsibility to hold up their end of that treaty relationship. And that is that this land, this dish with one spoon, that we are here to share it equally. And that was what we were willing to give, all people, this ownership of property and land and resources. Much of what we are seeing, especially right here at the heart of Turtle Island and the Zoginawan. I do believe that's where the Saugeen Ojibwe Nation name comes from, is that love,
Mhm.
the heart of Turtle Island. That's where we are residing currently. And the resources that are being extracted, the resources that are being extracted from our first mother, is definitely some things that we need to have a look at for sure.
It's important to take note of the land claim and what's happening right now, because despite the legal battles that are still ongoing, there's one thing that's extremely important that nobody's talking about. It is the breach of honor.
Mhm.
And as a personal member, I could take that two ways. I could take that as my own breach for not knowing my own sovereignty, and I think that's an important conversation that our own people need to have within, because that doesn't change the scope, but that strengthens our sovereignty when we understand it. Second to that, the Crown has declared that it is a breach of the Crown's honor. And that is something that is tremendous weight. And I think that has a potential to change the course of history, because we won't be signing a legal agreement if we're actually to do something. If we want to remedy that, it has nothing to do with a legal source system. It has everything to do with being a sovereign nation, because
Mhm.
it was with that sovereign nation that they signed the treaty with. Right now, we are the people, but we are separate from sovereignty. We connect that. We have a modern, brand new treaty that represents the alignments with the prophecies of Crazy Horse needs prophecy,
Mhm.
needs fire, where it's
Yes.
a new relationship, it's a new way, it's a new path. That is what I think we're on the doorstep of, because
Absolutely.
sovereignty has been looming over the heads and the minds of our people in the dream time for many years.
Mhm.
And across this nation, just yesterday I had a wonderful experience with a member, the last person in the world that I would expected to hear a conversation from about this very subject came full fruition yesterday. And that was enlightening, because I've heard the same story from others. And so that stirring, that life force is sitting silently within our people right now.
Mhm.
And it's not right now. I just want to solely shed light on the importance of understanding our own inner sovereignty. Because when we get there, a lot of this stuff will begin to contextualize itself.
Mhm.
And that we don't get into this loophole and these rabbit holes of treaty law and like different points of governance and et cetera, where everybody gets lost in the present government system. Um, it's just kind of the cyclical wheel of eroding cultural and professional integrity away via this one specific form. And we are doing that, and we're systematically failing ourselves. Um, we talk about culture, we talk about sovereignty. Um, but in the context of sovereignty, I'm experiencing a different line of life force, you see, now versus the former. And that's kind of what I'm really after here. The government bureaucratic stuff is what it is. But the enlightenment, the realization of sovereignty, integrity, the life force within, that didn't come full circle until all this happened. And all this breakdown, what we talk about, pointing out the legal kind of profound breaches with our own leadership of our own sacred laws and our own sovereignty, those are all happening presently. And that is why the system is failing. It's because we failed to recognize our own sovereignty within. And yes, that is a lonely path. But in the context of spirituality, whether you want to apply it to Christianity, whether you want to apply it to culture, Buddhism,
Yeah.
you name it, the
Yeah.
path of loneliness is the path to enlightenment. And that lonely feeling, that aloneness is where it's like I became like an eagle whistle, empty and hollow. But once the flow of the creator, that life force, it
Yeah,
produced music, it produced
yeah,
life.
yeah.
And that is the sovereignty I'm appealing to.
Yes,
We can all, every one of us can point to 100,000 issues of the current structure that is failing us right now. We can all do that. I'd rather appeal to what it takes to be an inner sovereign and what those steps look like, because that brings
absolutely.
all of this into context.
That's right.
The fight within, the fight for the soul.
Yes.
That's
And
what's
that's something that we can all do, all people here, is to look within. Anyone, First Nation, non-First Nation, settlers, you name it, anyone who is here on Turtle Island, if we can all look within, I think that is the key. That is that responsibility, because our spirit will all lead us to the answer that we're looking for, which is in that final prophecy about the unity of our people, of all people. You
Mhm.
know, when they say the rainbow people, I honestly truly believe is when people are fully aligned within themselves and their chakras are shining brightly.
Mhm.
That to me is the rainbow people.
There's so much to be talked about when it
Mhm.
comes to the magic and the spirituality of that.
Mhm.
Because when we talk about that sovereignty, can you imagine the communication that we had with nature? I can
Mhm.
experience a little bits of it here and there,
Mhm.
but walking in the full light of all your open chakras, creating that
Mhm.
color of the rainbow
Yeah.
and being in that presence, and that's a pretty profound thing.
Yeah.
And there's a lot we can go into that another day on that
Yeah.
one.
That's absolutely. But I think that's a good place to leave it for today. I think that we kind of covered this whole idea of sovereignty, some of these hard truths that are happening here across Turtle Island, not only here in Canada, of course, but also in the States. Because, as First Nations people, as you know, with the contributions that we made towards that War of 1812, like those borders are not recognized to our people. So, again, those rights that we had, those agreements that we made so very long ago that are being eroded, as this time goes on. So, I would just want to say, if there is one piece of advice that you would like to share with the people that are watching this podcast, what would it be?
How to become a pillar of sovereignty. That's the advice that I want to give, and how to do that. I physically wrote it down so I don't miss any of my own steps, because when I had departed everything in this world, left my career, left my aspirations, everything, I asked myself that question: how do I become sovereign?
Mhm.
And it came down to some basic principles. It was knowing full well, first and foremost, that our body, quite literally, our physical body, is literally a temple, a sacred temple. And we're to take care of that spiritually and physically. That means with eating well and exercising, sleeping and exercising. I already said that, but the other key thing is fasting and praying
Mhm.
on the regular, not just once in a lifetime.
Mhm.
Spending time alone to reflect and understand our inner selves. That's a terrifying one right there. It's like facing the monster.
Mhm.
Eating well and drinking lots of water, getting ample sunshine, nourishing our bodies. Walking in the rain to rejuvenate our souls and cleaning our energy,
Clearing, yeah.
cleaning our energy. And
Hmm.
then finally discovering ourselves. And I want to give some context to this. If you're trying to find yourself, I would encourage you to find out who you were born in. If you were born three different races, then you have more work to do. If you're born Indigenous, then understanding who you are, your history. Once you understand that history of who Creator made you to be, you could be, like I said, a couple different races, but that is more to know about yourself.
Mm-hmm.
What makes you you? Because everybody has a story. Everybody comes from a different part of the world.
Mm-hmm.
And we all have that story, but that contextualizes us for identifying who we are and then our purpose. And then fall on from there. It's quite a
So
journey.
so I was shuffling the cards. Okay, so I'm pulling my ancestor cards here while you were saying this is what I like to do while people are giving their advice. I like to shuffle and see what comes out and see what the ancestors are giving us. And so exactly what you were saying, drop your shields, drop your shields, go within, find out, really track down your fears and desires. That's what these two cards say.
That is
Yes, just
perfect.
perfect.
If I could
Absolutely. So
summarize
that's
that in two pictures, that's exactly what it would be. Go
exactly.
forth and put your shield down, because once you do,
That's right.
you're going to find something incredible.
That's right. Absolutely. Drop your shields and track down your fears and desires. And that's just it, right? The light and the dark, when you even look at it that way too, the fears and the desires, we have to have both and we have to have that balance. And, fear also keeps us safe, but, dropping your shield and having a really good look at what those fears are absolutely will help you on your way. So I just want to say Chimigwech, Doran, for being a guest on Ancestral Ascensions and sharing your story with how your ancestors or our ancestors, being both from the Saugeen Ojibwe Nation, helped to show you the way and bring you out of that place in the darkness.
Thank you for having me, Trish. This is
Mm-hmm.
truly an honor.
Mm-hmm. All right, Miigwech.
Thank you. Take care.